said at the very beginning, before Dr. Taub appeared, that we're delighted to have him return. He has an eminent reputation in the field of integrative medicine. He was not only a clinical professor at UCI Medical School, but he was also the medical director of a pediatric group, I believe in Tustin. Dr. Taub has an eminent career in integrative medicine, and he gave the first lecture on integrative medicine at the medical school in 1979. Quite an impressive early pioneer in this field. We're delighted to have him, and as you have seen on this distribution, that his talk today is entitled Voyage to Wellness, Stress Management in Today's World. Dr. Taub.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Where's Dean Ralph Clayman? Is he there? Oh, okay, good. Because, surprise, Dr. Clayman, I'm dedicating my talk to you. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Longhurst, for having me, and Dr. Tobes for the wonderful introduction. And it's good to be back here. You know, long ago, our health was understood to be rooted in our own natural internal healing force. And indeed, the discipline that we now call modern medicine or modern science began when wise physicians began divining health simply as assisting nature. Eventually, however, medical science began developing mostly into technology that's been focused on drugs and surgery and radiation. Unfortunately, during this evolution of medicine, the more natural remedies have been come to regarded as being almost worthless in many corners of our society. Yet, for all its great advances, medical technology seems to be taking an increasingly destructive toll on individuals and on society when it's not practiced correctly and conscientiously. Unfortunately, modern medicine may actually be harming as many patients as it's helping, because we here in America have now become the most over-medicated, over-surgerized, over-radiated, and over-tested people in the world, certainly since the beginning of recorded history. And it's exactly this that seems to be overwhelming our economy. So it's time for people, I believe, it's time for Americans to realize that the only way we are ever going to contain healthcare costs is to keep people well in the first place, and to keep them out of doctors' offices, except for preventive care, and out of hospitals, unless, of course, it's absolutely necessary that they receive care. Talking about cost containment, I want to tell you the story about a veterinarian. He was in his office, and his next patient happened to be a lady with a duck. And the duck wasn't moving, and the lady showed the veterinarian the duck and said, "Could you tell me what's the matter with the duck?" And the veterinarian took a look and said, "Madam, this is a dead duck." And she said, "Well, how can you be sure? How do you know it's not in coma?" And the veterinarian says, "Well, madam, if you absolutely insist, just wait a minute." So the veterinarian goes to his back room, and he comes back in his examining room with a Labrador retriever. And the veterinarian puts the duck on the examining table, and the Labrador Retriever puts his front paws on the examining table, and he sniffs the duck from bottom to top, and he looks up at the veterinarian, and he kind of howls and shakes his head and walks out. And the veterinarian says to the lady, well, are you comfortable now? And she says, well, not exactly. So he says, well, just a minute. He goes back in his back office, and this time he comes out with a cat, a little pussy cat. And the pussy cat goes up to the duck on the examining table, puts her paws on the duck's breast, sniffs the duck all over the place, and just goes meow, and shakes her head and walks out. And the veterinarian looks at the lady and says, Madam, for sure this is a dead duck. And she says, okay, well, how much is this? He goes to the computer and he says, it's $940. And she said, are you telling me it's $940 to tell me my duck is dead? And he says, you know, madam, that only would have cost $25, but you have to pay for the lab test and the CAT scan. Did you see that one coming? So, wise physicians still recognize that the natural resources of their patients are a crucial part of any total treatment strategy, along with the best that modern medicine has to offer. And that's the first precept of integrative medicine. Health is much too important to leave up to science, but health is also much too important to be unscientific about. So, to assist nature this evening or this afternoon, I'm going to offer you a wellness prescription. And I can assure you that all of the side effects of this wellness prescription are positive. The wellness prescription is especially important during this current recession, because health is, after all, our most precious asset. So what good are all the other assets that we're stressed out over and striving to achieve? What good are all of those assets if you don't have your health to enjoy them? The homes, the cars, the vacations, the furniture, all of the things that we strive for, especially getting stressed over in this recession, we need to remember that our health is still our very most precious asset. The problem is, however, is stress. Stress has become the major virus of our time. Stress is affecting virtually every man and woman and probably child in the United States. And it's ruining health, it's ruining happiness, and it's ruining lives. And stress, with all its attendant poor lifestyle choices, is probably responsible for about 80% of all of the doctor's office visits in the United States, especially doctor's office visits for chronic degenerative diseases. Indeed, stress is behind the massive epidemic that we're having right now of chronic degenerative diseases. Stress is the major reason why most people are overweight, why people are hypertensive, diabetic, arthritic, ulcer-ridden, hemorrhoidal, atherosclerotic, and coronary stroke and cancer prone. As a matter of fact, Americans, we here in America, we are the most overweight, hypertensive, diabetic, arthritic, ulcer-ridden, hemorrhoidal, atherosclerotic, coronary stroke and cancer prone people on the planet. And what are we going to do about that? Well, we can't do much about the economy. And we can't do much about our world right now. We can't change anything overnight, but we can make some amazing transformations in the way we respond to the world around us. Actually, there's a 1,500-plus-year-old saying in the Jewish Talmud, which is our book of sage sayings. And the saying is, I may not be able to change the world, but I can change myself. And that's what this lecture is about tonight. I'm hoping to motivate you and to inspire you to determine what you can do to change yourself, because the next precept of integrative medicine is this: your health is primarily determined by personal responsibility, self-value, and reverence for life. You notice I didn't say it was determined by the medications that you take, by the tests that you undergo, by the radiation, or by surgery. All of that is important. But your health is primarily determined by your own personal responsibility, self-value, and reverence for life. And to begin understanding this, we need to realize that everything is energy. Your energy, I'm energy, all the mass in this room, everything around us, the water here, everything is energy. And we can look at energy as coming from nature, or we can look at energy as coming from God. Energy coming from nature is simple to understand. It's that force that causes an acorn to grow into an oak tree. Or we can look at energy as equivalent to God's presence, especially God's presence in every living thing. To me, whether it's from nature or from God, to me it's the same. Yet the concept of energy is so radically amazing that personally I can only describe that as something sacred. And that's what I call spirit. So wellness I define as the reflection of the unfolding dance of life in which the energy of our body and our mind and our spirit are attuned to each other. Because when that energy of your body, your mind, and your spirit, that's something sacred attached to nature or God, when they're attuned to each other, that's when the power of your own natural healing force begins to flow freely and nurture and nourish your whole being. There's actually a quote that I use in all of my books from Walt Whitman. This was my first book, by the way, and it's called Voyage to Wellness. There have been 8 books since, but Voyage to Wellness came out in the early 80s. And the quote from Leaves of Grass, to me, is all about the healing force, and I use it as the preface to all my books. And here it goes. From Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. You will hardly know who I am or what I mean, but I shall be good health to you nevertheless, and I'll filter and fiber your blood. And failing to find me at first, keep encouraged. Missing me one place, search another. I stop somewhere waiting for you. Let me begin the next part of my talk with a local history lesson. I came to Orange County in 1963 to do my internship at Orange County Hospital. I graduated from Syracuse Medical School in New York. I came out to do an internship here in Orange County, and I saw the sunshine and just never went back. That was an easy decision. And I went to I served in the Coast Guard of the Public Health Service for 2 years, and then did my pediatric residency at LA County Hospital, USC, and then decided to come back to Orange County. I put out a shingle in Tustin as an individual practitioner. I was a young guy, and I decided that the way I was going to build my practice was to be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and just stalk the nurseries. So I hung out around the nurseries, especially at St. Joe's and West Med, where I was on staff, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and I picked up an average of about 10 babies a week for the next year. In addition to the babies, of course, then their siblings became my patients. And in addition to that, I was one of the few pediatricians that was taking Medi-Cal patients, so I had a huge practice of poverty-level patients as well. And in addition to that, I was one of the few pediatricians taking Champus insurance, which was the medical insurance for the Marines at El Toro Marine Base. I became one busy pup, and that was fine, but whoa. What began dawning on me is I learned nothing about what I was dealing with in medical school or internship and residency. Because what I was dealing with were families who were under stress. I had dozens of infants who were having colic all night, hundreds of toddlers and school kids who were getting repeatedly sick, kids who were just bouncing off the walls in their classrooms with what we then at that time called NH, or neurologically handicapped. We didn't know about ADD at that time. And the teenagers found me and they couldn't stay away. But the problem with the teenagers at that time is they were all dropping out with LSD. Their parents were bringing them into the office with little baggies of seeds and leaves in there saying, "Dr. Taub, what is this? I found this baggie in Johnny's drawer." And of course it was pot. But the kids were dropping out. They were dropping out from acid in their first period, and they were smoking pot in their third period, and they didn't care whether they were getting in trouble because everybody was totally tuned in at that time to Bobby Dylan, and the times are changing. And I had my own little comeuppance because just last week I took my 13-year-old grandson out, and we were listening to Bob Dylan on the radio, and he was playing like a Rolling Stone. You know that one. And I said, "Lucas, what do you think about Bob Dylan?" He said, "Who's that?" But he probably thinks Frank Sinatra is classical music too. So at any rate, what I began to do with these families is to spend more time with them. And in order to do that, by the way, I had to raise my office visit to $8, which raised some eyebrows here in Orange County. Within the next 10 years, I added 5 pediatricians within the next 10 years to my practice, all of whom were wonderful. They were all part of the clinical teaching staff at UCI. We all took our 3-month rotation to teach on the wards. And what we did as pediatricians, we listened to the patients, we cared for them, we took time with them. And Tustin Irvine Pediatric Medical Group then grew into 2 locations in Tustin and Irvine. And because of our reputation for listening and caring, we grew to 20,000 children. By 1997, we were so busy we didn't know what to do. But then an amazing revelation occurred one day when I was reading the New York Times, and I saw an article about Joseph Califano, who was the secretary of HEW under Kennedy. And Califano announced that, look, healthcare is now taking up 9% of gross national product, and Americans are spending $300 billion. By the way, just as an aside, now instead of 9%, it's 17%, and instead of 300 billion, we're spending 2 trillion plus, growing to 3 trillion. But at any rate, Joseph Califano said, as far as the Kennedy administration is concerned, the health of the American people is going to be determined more by what they're willing to do for themselves rather than what doctors